Day isn't only Easter, but it's April Fool's. Now, April Fool's Day has never been a favorite day of mine, besides it's my mom's birthday. I've never really enjoyed being fooled or pranked. But this April Fool's Day is great. Easter, the greatest April Fool's joke ever. God pulled an awesome trick on Pilate, on Herod, on the Jews, on the disciples, on the women, on all of humanity. First of all, the Jews. Now, the Jews were in leadership, and these are really the Jews we're talking about, the ones that were the Sanhedrin, the powerful Jews. They were under the control of the Roman Empire, but this Jewish council had power over all of the Jewish people. This Jesus man scared the Pharisees and the Sadducees. He told them they were wrong. He had a following of common people. He sometimes called them out and made a fool of them. They didn't like this man, Jesus, so they did something. They schemed and they found a way to get rid of this dangerous man. They pulled no punches. They got the crowd behind them. They got Herod and Pilate to be on their side to keep the status quo. They won. Jesus was dead. This Jesus man was done. But April Fools, because he's alive. Pilate was the procurator of one of the farthest areas from Rome within the Roman Empire. The procurator's primary faction and functions were military, but they were also representatives of the Roman Empire and were responsible for the collection of taxes and had some judicial functions. Now, normally Pilate resided in Caesarea, but he traveled throughout the province, especially to Jerusalem during the Passover. Pilate, as governor, would have been expected to keep Jerusalem in order. It was a lot of people there, and he would have wanted it calm and peaceful. He would not ordinarily be visible through the throngs of worshipers because of the Jewish holiday, but he was this year. According to the New Testament, Jesus was brought to Pilate by the Sanhedrin, who had arrested Jesus and questioned them themselves. The Sanhedrin, according to the Gospels, only had been given answers by Jesus that they considered blasphemous against the law. So, they took him to Pilate. They also shared with Pilate that this was kind of a tax issue, because Jesus was claiming to be a king and all our taxes should go to Caesar, so we better get rid of it. Pilate was responsible for that tax collection. Pilate's main question to Jesus was whether he considered himself to be king of the Jews. He wanted him to say yes so he could assess him as a potential political threat. The Gospel of Mark says, Pilate said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said, "It is as you say." Other translations say, "Thou sayest," or "so you say." But whatever degree or confirmation modem or modern interpreters would derive, Jesus really didn't answer the question. The chief priests began hurling accusations toward Jesus, and he stayed silent. Pilate asked him why he didn't respond to charges, and he remained silent. So Pilate was astonished. So Pilate appears to be reluctant to follow through with this crucifixion of Jesus because he didn't find any fault in him. So he decided to let the Jews decide. He put him up and he said, should we crucify Barabbas, who was a prisoner, or Jesus? The people yelled, "Crucify Jesus." The threat to the status quo was eliminated. Jesus was dead. Well, April Fool's on Pilate, because he's alive. The Jewish people in the crowd. The Jewish people in the crowd, as I said, were in Jerusalem for the celebration of the Passover. It was a festival to remember when their ancestors were saved from the Pharaoh in Egypt. Thousands, and might even hundreds of thousands, would travel to Jerusalem for the festival. For many of them this year, it was a little different, because there was this man, this prophet Jesus that was in the temple. He rebuked the marketplace. He was preaching about things they didn't believe or couldn't understand. Some of them were there for Palm Sunday, and they believed in him, and they laid their cloaks and their palm branches down. There were thousands of people in town from all over Judea. As the week went on, the Jews listened to the priests and the scribes. For thousands of years, these religious leaders were the right ones. They knew what to do. So when they told us to shout Barabbas, we did. When they told us to shout crucify him, they did. Most of the Jews were happy. That man with the crown, that man that claimed to be a Messiah, that Son of God, was dead. The threat was over. But April Fools, he's alive. The disciples and the women. They had followed Jesus for about 3 years. They had walked many, many miles and seen and heard and experienced many things. They had been there when the blind received their sight, or when the lame could walk again, when the leper was welcomed home. They had sat for hours and heard Jesus tell parables of lost sheep and lost children of God, and the prodigal sons and the Samaritans. They had witnessed the feeding of the thousands and the walking on waters and the calming of the sea. They had experienced the power, the wonder, the awesomeness of God. The last few weeks before Passover, some different things had happened. Jesus talked about dying. Jesus talked about the end, but the disciples didn't understand. During Passover, they loved the parade, how great it was. People were celebrating Jesus as King. The Passover meal on Thursday was a great time again to sit down and eat with Jesus, but this time it's a little different. Because Jesus talked about betrayal and denial, and even washed their feet and talked about servanthood. Then they went to the garden to pray, and the Romans came to get Jesus, and the soldiers took him away. The humanness of the disciples came through, and they run and hid. I'm sure they were confused and didn't know what to do. And then they watched Jesus die. It was over. The dream of this kingdom of Jesus was gone. It was erased. He was dead. But April Fools, because he's alive. Then we have Easter morning. It had been about 36 hours of mourning for these women that they had a job to do. They had to go and prepare Jesus' body for permanent burial. They went to the tomb ready to wash and oil the body, and it was still dark, but the Jewish Sabbath was over, so they went as soon as they could. They went to the garden, and the tomb was empty. It was empty. There was no body. They were scared. Who took it? Who stole Jesus' body? What happened to it? We just want to bury it. There was a gardener there, and they talked to him. April Fools, Mary, I'm alive. What about you? We started Lent reminding ourselves of the love of God. God loves me, loves us, more than we can ever imagine. I know that God loves the world more than any of us could ever comprehend. I know that in everything, God is working for my salvation and for the salvation of the whole world. I know that God has my best interest in mind all the time. I believe that I will pass into God's hands at the time when my earthly life is over. For me, the rest of the details, I'm able to leave all the details up to God. For me, I don't have to understand the resurrection to know that it's true. That's what I believe. Other people have different things and different needs, but this is what I believe. Harvey Cox, an author, put it very well when he said that the resurrection is the laughter of the universe. Now this sounds kind of funny, but think about it. Mary may have wept at first, but only until she discovered God did she laugh. In the resurrection, I believe God laughs at the world because all our human understanding had been turned on its ear. They all thought it was over. Jesus is dead. Well, he's not. Resurrection makes no physical sense. We can't explain it. We can't quantify it. We can't subject it to physical scientific test. It's simply there to believe. I think God laughs because we think we're still smart enough to figure it out. God laughs when we tie ourselves into knots trying to figure out something that's unexplainable. God laughs at those who doubt his ability to carry out his will in the world. People wonder how God could possibly possess the capability to keep everything under control. But the God who created all things, the whales and the honeybees, the antelopes, the aardvarks, the penguins, the porpoises, the birds, the buzzards, the monkeys, the kangaroos, not to mention us, with our infinite varieties of hair and eye color, skin texture, height, weight, interest, abilities, God laughs at those who thinks he can't carry out a simple resurrection. After creating the universe, the resurrection is a piece of cake for God. And finally, I really believe that God laughs at the pure fun of the whole endeavor. We are much too serious around church sometimes. Can't you imagine God with a great big grin on his face when we finally get it? We all know how much fun it is to give gifts at birthday and Christmas and whenever we can. Can you only imagine how exciting it was for God to give us salvation? Can you imagine God smiling when Jesus ascends back to heaven and Jesus is home again? That's the laughter of Easter. However, Jesus, God, Easter can also be a serious laughing matter. We have to choose to believe. So choose joy. Choose Jesus. Choose life. Choose Jesus. Choose love. Choose Jesus. Can you hear the universe laughing at the joy of Easter? And you can have it for yourself as well.